بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of His blessings that He has bestowed upon us, and we beseech Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in those blessings. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for affording each and every one of us to come to such a gathering whereby we seek to acquire such knowledge that guides us to and guides us along the straight path. And we also thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for these special days and these special evenings that we find ourselves in. And these are the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. We know that the best nights of the year are contained within the month of Ramadan. So the best month of the year is the month of Ramadan. And the significance of the month of Ramadan is due to its nights as opposed to its days. And therefore the most significant night of the year is the night of power. However, when it comes to days as opposed to nights, then the most significant days of the year are the first 10 days of the Hijjah. And there are a number of proofs in that particular regard. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what we refer to in Arabic as Azim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is great. ولا عظيم لا يعظم إلا ما هو عظيم ولا يقسم إلا بما هو عظيم. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is great. When He takes an oath, He doesn't take an oath except by that which is great. Many times in the Holy Quran, when Allah takes an oath regarding something, it is to aggrandize that particular thing. So Allah takes an oath about these particular days. And Ibn Abbas, he says that ما من أيام الأعمال الصالحة فيه أفضل من هذه الأيام. There are no days in which good deeds are more virtuous, more rewarding, more excellent than these particular 10 days. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable each and every one of us to take maximum and optimum benefit from the 10 days bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of us uphold these 10 days by fasting. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cause it to weigh heavily on your scales. So if we can switch from the Gregorian year, from the solar year to the lunar year, or from the lunar year to the solar year. We also now in the month of June, is it June? And we're now coming towards the middle of the year. Most schools are on leave, and our practice has also been that during the school holidays, and then we take a break and we come back after the holidays bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this evening will be our last class for this school semester, and then we will resume inshallah in the new term bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's a few things I'd like to mention. We're going to do our liberalism lesson, and then we're going to read a bit in terms of purification of the heart. But to start off, I wanted to mention something which one of the brothers asked me about, and that is in relation to Islamic finance. Now, Islamic finance practitioners, you'd find that they busy themselves with basically three things. Number one is, depending on which aspect and which facet you're dealing with in terms of Islamic finance. Let's say that you're dealing with an investment company. So the investment company would basically have an index. So an Islamic practitioner, what we refer to as a Sharia board member, what you would basically do is to ensure that that particular index, all the companies on that index is Sharia compliant. So that's his first task. The second task is that index of companies that Muslims seek to invest in, it's not a stagnant index. It is an index that is always in flux. Certain companies are going to meet the Sharia filters, while other companies are not going to meet the Sharia filters. So then he needs to not only have the index, he needs to maintain that particular index. And the last part of his responsibility is advocacy. And that is really what I want to talk about this evening. Advocating the Islamic alternative. So one of the brothers mentioned to me that in terms of home finance, so I just want to talk about home finance very quickly. If you look at conventional home finance, what do you have? What is the model of home financing that we have? And the reason why I'm talking about it this evening is because I feel it is our responsibility as Sharia practitioners to advocate for the Islamic alternative. And why is that? I speak under correction, I think it's Surah An-Nisa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةُ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. There should be from amongst you a group that calls towards good and forbids from evil. Now, if we understand Sharia and we understand the Sharia alternative, we understand very clearly therefrom that the Sharia alternative, or the Sharia solution, rather, not alternative, the Sharia solution, alternate would be in terms of our circumstances, because you have a conventional solution at your disposal, and then you have what we refer to as an alternate Sharia solution at your disposal. But let's just simply refer to it as the Sharia solution. The Sharia solution is going to bring a benefit to you and is going to push away a certain harm. So when it comes to home financing, you have an alternate in front of you. What's the alternate? Or you have alternatives, you have options. The one is a conventional loan. What is a conventional loan? It's important for us to understand what a conventional loan is. If you go to a conventional bank and you apply for a conventional loan, they're going to lend the money to you. Let's say the house is valued at 1.5 million or 2 million. The bank is going to lend that money to you. You're going to take that money and purchase the house. And then you have to repay that loan to the bank. So if you borrow 2 million rands from the bank, you have to repay them the principal amount of 2 million plus interest. And the interest part is the problem. The loan is not the problem. The problem is the interest which is charged thereon. So you have to repay interest. And that is the conventional model. By the grace and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have Sharia practitioners, I'm not referring to myself, our elders, they, within this conventional market, they've created a niche market, and that is the Islamic alternative. So as opposed to you borrowing 2 million rand from the bank and repaying the 2 million plus interest, which is a usurious transaction which is prohibited in Islam, there are other alternatives. What are the alternatives? The alternatives are real alternatives. Why? Because interest only comes into the equation when you borrow money from somebody. If I borrow money from you, 1,000 rands, then I repay you the 1,000 rands, the loan, and you say, I want over and above the 1,000 rands, I want you to pay me 250 rands interest. So interest really only becomes a factor in a loan arrangement. Only when there's a loan can you have interest. If there's no loan, you can't have interest. So the loan contract is the locus for interest. In other words, if there's no loan contract, there's no interest. I can't sell you something and charge you interest. If I sell you something and I'm getting a return on the sale, then that is not called interest, it's called profit. Not because we change the names, but because in the first instance it is a loan contract, and in the second instance it is a sale. So for example, you go to Al-Barakah Bank, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the brother mentioned to me that, you know, many of us are oblivious and unaware of the Islamic alternative. Many of us are unaware and oblivious of the Islamic alternative. So I'm using this opportunity to put forward and to present the Islamic alternative to you, and also to explain to you very clearly and lucidly that there's a fundamental difference between conventional finance and the Islamic finance model. So for example, if you go to Al-Barakah and you want to purchase a house, and I don't work for Al-Barakah, I'm just using that as an example because I'm quite familiar with their products. So if you go to Al-Barakah Bank by way of example, then what's going to happen? They're going to purchase a house. You're going to enter into an agreement with them. They're going to purchase a house. So let's say the current value of the house is 2 million. They're going to purchase the house for 2 million. Once they take possession of the house, they're going to resell the same house to you for 2 million plus a profit. So let's say they sell it to you for 2.5 million. So that 500,000 extra, is that interest or is it profit? That's profit. Why? Because the arrangement is a sale arrangement. I buy a phone, for example, for 10,000 rands. I sell it to you for 12,500 rands. And I disclose to you, say, look, I'm not making much on you, I'm only making 2.5. That 2.5, can we call that interest? We can't call it interest because it's a sale. And the return on the sale is called profit. So while Islam permits profit, Islam doesn't permit interest. And this sort of let's call it a conundrum that we have. The same conundrum, it beset the pagan Arabs. Because the pagan Arabs said, look man, what's the difference? This was the pagan Arabs making this argument that Allah has made the sale permissible, and what do you get from a sale? You get a return. And then when I lend you money, and then I charge you interest, I also get a return. So here's a return, there's a return, it's the same thing. You follow? But Quran is quick to say that it's not the same thing. There was a person, and I say this with a lot of respect, and also with a great degree of caution, but it must be understood in its context. There was a scholar from the Middle East by the name of Abdullah ibn Mani, also on the cutting edge of Islamic finance. He said the person who equates, like Islamic finance now, proper Islamic finance product, a person who equates that with conventional finance, in other words, a sale is the same like a loan, you're just giving it a different name. That person fits into one of two categories. The one is worse than the other. The first one would be that the person is simply ignorant and ignoramus, meaning the person really doesn't understand how underlying contracts work, because a sale is fundamentally different to a loan. And in order to understand the difference between the two, you need to fundamentally understand the difference between a sale and a loan contract. It's two completely different contracts, number one. Number two, if despite the fact that the person, and this is where we need to understand Sheikh Abdullah ibn Mani's words into context, a person who simply refuses to acknowledge the difference between a sale and a loan, then he's actually contending with Quran, because Quran tells you that the sale is different from a loan. And if a person contends with Quran in terms of what is categorically stated in Quran, then it does become an issue. So this is important for us to understand. My point behind mentioning this today is not to scare advertise, if I can use a conventional term. No. My point is for us to educate ourselves about the Islamic alternative. And here we have it in Islamic finance. Part of the ethos of our class is for you to actually avail yourself to what we would consider as the Islamic alternative in every facet of your life. Girlfriend, boyfriend, that's an alternative. But the Islamic alternative is marriage. It's the better alternative in every aspect. And you can interact with me on this one, Anis, and you can tell me whether I'm getting it right or I'm getting it wrong on this one. I have a good thought about our Muslim brothers and sisters, and that is that we are not aware of the alternative. And what our responsibility is actually to present the alternative. The alternative I'm talking about is the Islamic alternative, because it's always the better alternative. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. Allah has perfected His blessing upon us in terms of, if you want a blueprint for life and you want to be successful in life, then that blueprint for life is Islam. So, I gave an example before, but the preamble to the example's got nothing to do with the example. But just like, before, in advertising, Alisa, in South African advertising, I believe that there are rules and regulations in terms of advertising. So what happened is that, let's say for example, it's a BMW, Bavaria Motor Works, if I'm getting it correctly, they doing advertising. So the competition, let's say the competition is Mercedes. In the advert, they can't tell you that here's a BMW and here's a Mercedes, the BMW is a better alternative. I believe that in terms of South African regulations, you can't advertise like that. But there's an advert that has the BMW open and it has the Mercedes covered. But it's covered, but you know the old Mercedes, it would have the emblem jutting out on top of the bonnet. So it's very clear that that is a Mercedes. You with me? Now let's just say that Mercedes is the better car. What are you seeing? You're only seeing the BMW. So you go for the BMW. And the Mercedes is covered. Us as Muslims, what's happening to us is that in most instances, we are only seeing the conventional alternative and we are not seeing the Islamic alternative at all. It doesn't feature. And that is problematic for us because given a sporting chance, Islam would win hands down. If you look at Islam as a solution, a full package, A to Z, end to end solution for your entire life, and you compare it to other solutions, you're going to find that Islam wins hands down. The challenge, however, is that we are not versant, we're not familiar, we don't know about the laws of Islam. Another example would be, and people sometimes consult with me in terms of inheritance. So I say to them that the best choice that you could make in relation to your inheritance is the Islamic choice. It makes sense both in terms of your estate plan, before anything else, before the fact that this is the Islamically right choice, right? It is the best choice in terms of managing your estate. In other words, the best that you could possibly want in terms of your estate plan and your succession plan, the best solutions for that is contained within the Sharia. No matter what your estate looks like, the best option is Sharia option. And kuntum khayra ummati. So why do we call to this? Why do we advocate for this? I'm not getting a commission. I'm not, there's no perks. I'm advocating because we are advocates of Islamic law. And that is in your best interest. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq, inshallah. And engage with your scholars. In our masjid, yeah, once or twice we had like nice, robust and long-ended discussions about Islamic finance as opposed to conventional finance. And one of the biggest challenges that the brothers have is that the price structure is exactly the same. If you go to conventional finance, at the end of the day, after 15 years, you end up paying 3 million. You go to Al-Barakah, the Islamic alternative, you still end up paying 3 million. So the logic is that if I end up paying the same, then it must be the same. You follow me? If I end up paying the same, then it must be the same. That's not correct. The pricing structure of something doesn't make it the same. It doesn't equate between two things. It's a fallacy. The fact that the pricing structures are exactly the same doesn't mean that essentially these two contracts are exactly the same and therefore there's no difference. It's just a play on words. I'm thinking of an example now that I speak in the connection, but it was Abu Hurairah. And at Khaybar, so he bought dates and he shared the dates with the Prophet and it was very good quality. So the Prophet said to him, are all the dates of Khaybar like this, of this quality? He says, no. I had to give 3 portions of dates for 1 portion. So if you look at it classically, that is what type of transaction is that? That's a usurious transaction because it's homogeneous, it's dates for dates. And when you exchange date for dates, no matter what the quality is, it must be like a kilo for a kilo. It must be equal. You follow me? So what did the Prophet tell him? You know what you must do? You must take your 3 portions of dates and sell it for money. So now no more homogeneous. You get the money, then you take that money and then you buy the 1 kilo from the Khaybar dates. You follow me? So at the end of the day, Abu Hurairah, did he spend the same amount of money? Exactly the same amount of money. Same pricing structure. Same pricing structure. But what does the Prophet ﷺ say? That if you exchange three portions, 3 kilograms of dates for 1 kilogram of date, that's riba. But if you take the 3 and you sell it and you get the money and then you pay for the 1 kilogram, that's not riba. Why? Because the underlying contract is fundamentally different. So this is very important. And one example in terms of riba, that's what the example that one of the brothers mentioned to me. And I feel it's important that we speak about this and advocate the Islamic alternative, simply because that's the best alternative, and in the spirit of the Quranic ayah, and for us to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us, Kuntum khayra ummatin, you are the best of nations. You have been given the best way of life. And this is not something that we have a monopoly over, something that we must, in today's time they call it conscientious capitalism. You'll find that non-Muslims very much buy into the idea of Islamic finance. Why? Because it strikes a chord with him in terms of the morality of it, in terms of the justice of it, in terms of the fairness of it. And here we have this is the religion which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us. So may Allah give us the tawfiq, inshallah, for us to realize what we have in terms of our deen, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to practice upon the bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll read a little bit. That took a little bit of time. I didn't think it's going to take that much time. But we'll read a little bit about the intellectual mentality, or rather the liberal mentality. And the author discusses one or two rather interesting things that I will do my level best to structure, and we can take benefit there from bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as opposed to me babbling on, I'm going to be reading the text and then translating as we go along. And if you have any questions, or please feel free and engage, so we can benefit optimally bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he starts off by saying, Al-fikru al-libraliyyah fikrun a'imun ya'tamidu ala haqqi al-fard al-wahid fi ikhtiyari ma yuridu. So many of the things, it may appear to be somewhat repetitive in terms of what we're explaining, but there are certain nuanced differences in every chapter. So the heading of this particular chapter talks about the basis of liberalism. If you have a certain position, then that position must have a certain basis, what we refer to in Arabic as asl, a basis. So when you say something, you must say it on a particular basis. So this is an introduction to what is the basis of liberalism. Does it have a basis? You say something, then on what basis are you saying it, I would ask you. If I disagree with you, I'm going to question the basis on which you are saying something. So this is an introduction into the basis of liberalism. You will recall before that we said that the problem with liberalism is it actually doesn't have a basis. I don't know if you recall, because we mention this quite often, and I think it's important to remind ourselves that Imam Shafi'i had given a term for liberalism. He refers to it as as-sudawiyya. أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانُ أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى. Does man think that he will be left to his own devices? In other words, he is not commanded, he is not prohibited, he does what he wants to. So if ever there was a principle for liberalism, it would basically be that general principle, that man is left to his own devices. He can do what he wants to, or how he wants to, no matter what the consequences are, as long as he is liberated to do what he wants to do. But he's going to discuss this particular issue, and in discussing it, and I think very important for us is that we identify as Muslims first and foremost. So for me, one of the most important takeaways from these discussions is that, is it possible for me to be a Muslim and a liberalist at the same time? Is it possible? Is it possible? Or are they two mutually exclusive things, like night and day? Water and oil. They don't sync with one another. And I think that's really the point of looking at everything, because this book on liberalism is not really written for a non-Muslim person. It's written for a Muslim person. And many of us, and it's been mentioned before, to a degree, and this is a reality within our households, that many of us, we identify as liberalists. We call ourselves liberalists. I'm a liberal. But we imagine that I can be a liberal, but I can be a Muslim at the same time. But the author says here, it's like, sitting on a bench. You're sitting on the one side of the bench. You're on the bench nevertheless, but you don't know what lies on the other side of the bench. So for us to understand exactly what liberalism means is very important, and how it's at loggerheads with certain of our Islamic beliefs. That is my understanding of what's going to be mentioned now. So he starts off by saying that liberalism as a concept, it's a floating concept. You can't pin it down. The goalposts are forever changing. Like if we were to put 5 liberalists in a row, they would be espousing to 5 completely different ideals. Why? Because it's based on individuality. It's all, whatever that person wants, that's his form of liberalism. So you'd find that the one liberalist would consider something to be impermissible. The other liberalist next to him would consider the very same thing not to be permissible, but to be necessary, by way of example. So it's a floating ideology. It floats from individual to individual. That's the first point he makes. And then he gets into a interesting discussion. So liberalism is a floating ideology. What does it tie into? يعتمد على حق الفرد الواحد في اختيار ما يريد. It's a floating thing, and what does it float around? What the individual wants. So whatever the individual wants, that's what he does, and that's really the liberal thought. You with me? It's tied into a deeper issue of belief for us. The liberalist believes that he creates his own actions. So now it's no longer a liberal discussion. It is now an Islamic discussion. So I want to be a liberal. La samah Allah, Allah forbid. So liberal thought is a floating thought. What does it tie into? I do whatever I want to do. But if we go take a step back and we look in terms of Islamic theology and in terms of our tenets of faith, leave alone the fact that you cannot do what you want to do, your very actions, we believe, is not your creation, but is created by Allah. You with me? So again, now if you look at it, I want to be a liberal, but how does this tie into my faith? It doesn't tie into your faith at all. And if you want to, then we can say, look, that discussion is an in-house discussion that we need to have in terms of predestination. But is it a tenet of our faith? I'm asking. Like, it's not a rhetorical question. Predestination. Do we believe in predestination? Yes, we do. Do you completely understand it? That's a different question altogether. But do we believe in it? So we have what we refer to as, I'm sure you're familiar, we would have this formula that we recite. So what is the formula? Amantu billah. The short formula, Amantu billahi kama wa bi asma'i wa sifati wa qabiltu jami' ahkami. I believe in Allah as He is, with all of His names and all of His qualities, and I accept all of His laws. That's what it means to be a Muslim. So, I mean, even that. So now, you accept the laws of Allah. So if what you want goes against the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what are we going to do? We're not going to be liberal about it. We're going to accept the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which we might have an intelligence, but that is based on a higher form of intelligence. You with me? Okay. The second formula that we're all familiar with, we have these 5 formulae or 7 formulae that you may or may not have come across when you were much younger. The next one reads, which is the detailed one, the last one. It's called Iman Mufassal, detailed. Amantu billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi wal yawmil akhiri, and what comes after, wal qadri khayrihi wa sharrihi min Allah ta'ala. And I believe in predestination, that good and bad, everything comes from Allah. In the narration, I speak under correction, I think it's in Muslim, it's authentic. It says that al-qadr, hulwuhu wa murruhu. You know, the good and bad, the sweet and the bitter, it all comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what we believe in. Allah talks in the Holy Quran, what does Allah say? Wallahu khalaqakum. Wallahu khalaqakum. Allah created you. It's very simple if you read it. Wallahu khalaqakum. Allah created you. But then the verse goes on, وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. And Allah creates that what you do as well. You know, what you do is, some of the scholars argue, and the point I want to just mention very clearly is that liberalism, where you create whatever you do, and within an Islamic paradigm, in terms of our tenets of faith, Allah creates all of your actions. So our scholars argue that if you created your own action, it means that you need to intimately know exactly what that action entails in order for you to create and bring it about. I'm speaking to you currently. The speech that is emanating from my mouth, am I creating the speech or is Allah creating the speech? If I say I'm creating the speech, it means I need to know the intimate details of what it requires to create speech. I need to understand the dynamic of when I breathe in, then I take in air. This air goes into my lungs. It comes up from my lungs, it strikes the vocal cords, the required vocal cords, sound is created and sound comes out. If you created your action, you need to know your action. If you were the creator of the action, then let's look at your involuntary actions. There's certain actions currently, you are breathing. Up until this point in time, you weren't conscious of your breathing. The fact that I mentioned that you are breathing, you suddenly become conscious of the fact that you are breathing in and breathing out, but otherwise you weren't conscious thereof. If you're creating it, you need to be conscious of what you are creating. So how is it that you can be creating the action? So our belief is that Allah SWT creates everything. In the Jawhara, which is a poetry form which contains all of our beliefs, the author says, فَخَالِقٌ لِعَبْدِهِ وَمَا عَمِلْ مُوَفِّقٌ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ أَن يَصِلْ وَخَاذِلٌ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ بُعْدَهُ وَمُنْجِزٌ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ وَعْدَهُ فَوْزُ السَّعِيدِ عِنْدَهُ فِي الْأَزَلِ كَذَا الشَّقِي ثُمَّ لَمْ يَنْتَقِلِ. Basically what it means, فَخَالِقٌ لِعَبْدِهِ. Allah creates it's a paraphrasing of the Quranic verses. When our scholars write this poetry, it's not that let's create a new work. No. Whatever is contained within the Quran and the way of the Prophet ﷺ, they paraphrase it and make it easier for us to memorize. So فَخَالِقٌ لِعَبْدِهِ. Allah creates the slave. وَمَا عَمِلْ, whatever he does. مُوَفِّقٌ لِمَنْ أَرَادَ. Allah enables you, if Allah wants you to reach Him, then Allah enables you and facilitates for that pathway in order for you to reach Him. And that's why we say, لَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. There's no power to desist from wrong, no might to do good, except by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the important point, I'm just mentioning that to re-emphasize our belief in what is probably one of the most difficult tenets of our faith to rationally wrap our heads around. That's not my point here. The Prophet ﷺ discouraged that you go into it too much. What do we agree upon? لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَعَلَيْهَا مَا اكْتَسَبَتْ. Allah creates the action, but through your volition, you earn that action. And because you earn the action, Allah SWT holds you accountable. And that's the balance between the two. And beyond that, our scholars discourage us from going there. But the point being, is this part of our belief? Yes, it's part of our belief. So if this is part of our belief, this is our departure point. Can we be liberal in this particular regard? Whereas a liberalist, he believes that ultimately, I choose what I want to do, and that's based on the fact that it's a sort of like a Mu'tazili type of approach that we create our own actions, and as Muslims traditionally we don't believe in that. And Allah SWT knows best. So that covers 1.5 pages here, and I think we can stop on that with the last one. The Jamaat seems to be somewhat transfixed even in Anis, what's happening? I don't know, it's very serious. It is a fairly serious discussion. Ali Khan is looking too serious, man. So, Ali, are you okay? So, are there any questions on that aspect? I was listening to something interesting from one of our contemporary scholars, Sheikh Basim, and he was giving a lesson in terms of spirituality. Spirituality, it was Islamic theology. So the idea of coming to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the idea behind it is to create an awe within our hearts for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says the purpose of every knowledge, he says across the board, of every knowledge, is that through that knowledge you gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if that knowledge, whether it is related to religion or what we consider not to be related to religion, physics, maths, medicine, engineering, whatever it is. If that knowledge is not bringing you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there's a problem in that knowledge. And if you're sitting in a biology lesson and through your knowledge and that form of enrichment is not going to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there's a discrepancy in terms of that particular knowledge. What about still if you come to a gathering like this and we start learning, but it doesn't bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there's a challenge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make what we are learning a means of us gaining closeness to Him, inshallah. So we were talking about from من كتاب نخبة المطلوب من شرح مطرة القلوب تأليف العلامة المجدد الشيخ محمد حسن بن أحمد الخديم, from the book called Purification of the Heart, and it's basically going to study certain of the characteristics that we must embellish ourselves with and we must rid ourselves with. So last week he spoke very much about how we should adopt the quality of bashfulness. There's a few narrations of the Prophet ﷺ in that particular regard, which we will start off by reading today. So وروي عن ابن مسعود رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال ذات يوم لأصحابه. So this is in relation to bashfulness, modesty. So Ibn Mas'ud was a very famous companion of the Prophet ﷺ. And in our tradition, when the name Abdullah is mentioned just like that, Abdullah. So the plural of Abd is Abadi. So from amongst the companions, we refer to the Abadila. So you get Abdullah ibn Umar, you get Abdullah ibn Abbas, and you get Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. But if you're reading a narration and you come across just Abdullah is mentioned, then it always refers to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is a very unique, he's one of the first of the companions to accept Islam very early on. And he was subject to one of the greatest torture at the time. He wasn't from a very affluent clan, from the sub-clans of Quraysh. I don't exactly know his connection. And he was a shepherd. So while he was shepherding, he met the Prophet ﷺ. There was a goat, and the goat didn't have any milk, barren, so to say, in terms of milk. So the Prophet ﷺ, when he put his blessed hands on the udders of the goat, then automatically the udders filled up with milk and they were able to drink. So when Abdullah ibn Mas'ud witnessed this miracle, immediately he accepted Islam. But the unique thing about the biography of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he was very short, what we would refer to as a midget. Every time I go revisit the biography that I normally read, and he was probably about this height, Abdul Mas'ud. One day he was like climbing a tree. So it's quite a spectacle. I mean, Abdullah being so short and he's climbing the tree and his legs are dangling. So the companions are looking at his legs and it's quite amusing. It's quite a spectacle. He's short and he's climbing and you can imagine, he's saying, I'm going to the Kaaba and I'm going to pray out in the open, I'm going to recite the Quran out in the open. They told him, don't do it. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud is so diminutive, and he still has the gusto. And these are the early days of Islam. He still has the gusto, and he goes and he's going to pray and he's going to recite Quran in the immediate vicinity of the Kaaba, where all the heads of the Quraysh are gathered. So he goes and the enemies, they fix him up. So on this occasion he's climbing and his legs are dangling and the companions are laughing at his legs. So the Prophet ﷺ asked him, what are you laughing at? It was clear, what they're laughing at. He says, by Allah, on the Day of Judgment, these dangling legs that you are laughing at will be weightier than the Mount of Uhud on the scales. So it's not the size, it's the substance. Dynamite comes in small packages like this. So there's a little bit about Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. He narrates this particular hadith. I put the amin. Now, so the narration reads as follows: "Istahyu min Allah haqq al-haya, faqalu inna nastahi ya Rasul Allah." So the Prophet ﷺ says to his companions, Abdul Mas'ud says, that be bashful as you're supposed to be bashful from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the companions, they respond by saying to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O Prophet of Allah, inna nastahi ya Rasulullah. We are bashful. We have this quality of bashfulness. No? I always find it very interesting to highlight the unique relationship that the Prophet had with his companions. You know, our expectancy in terms of etiquette is when the Prophet ﷺ says that you must have bashfulness, everybody says, yes. In our terms, it's almost like the Prophet ﷺ is telling them, have bashfulness, and then they're saying to the Prophet ﷺ, ma who know? What do you mean? We are as bashful as we can possibly be. You know, and maybe what more do you expect from us? I'm just like adding more drama to it. But you find that the companions on many occasions, the Prophet would speak to them very respectfully. They would, retort is a wrong word, but they would remonstrate with the Prophet. O Prophet of Allah, you're telling us to have bashfulness, but we do have bashfulness. We are bashful. So the Prophet doesn't say to them, what do you mean? Keep quiet, don't backchat. What I'm telling, backchatting is bad, but not every backchat is a backchat. You with me? And it's important for us to develop a better attitude, man. If somebody is like, but he's not necessarily being rude to you, but maybe they have something valid to say. Look, our children particularly, they must be taught respect. But not every instance where they remonstrate with you that they are necessarily being rude. Because if every backchat was rude, then the companions are guilty of being rude. Because the Prophet is telling them, look here, have bashfulness. Then they say, oh, Prophet Allah, we are bashful. You with me? And there's many narrations like this. I just thought to highlight it. So the Prophet says, Laysa dhalik. I'm not talking about that, what you're referring to in terms of bashfulness. I'm referring to a superlative sense of bashfulness. And what is that? وَلَكِنْ مَنِ اسْتَحْيَا مِنَ اللَّهِ حَقَّ الْحَيَاءِ. The person who is bashful of Allah as he's supposed to be bashful, what will he do? فَلْيَحْفَظِ الرَّأْسَ وَمَا وَعَى. He must protect his, here the word head is used. He must protect his head and what it contains. In other words, he must guard his thoughts. Don't have indecent thoughts, in other words. Maybe they were looking at their parent, what Ishaa is that I must lower my gaze. So we are lowering our gaze. The Prophet says that's one level. But there's a level above that. What's that level above that? That you are bashful of Allah, you're always conscious of Allah. So Allah knows everything. Allah knows what's in your thoughts. So then you guard your thoughts as well. Because Allah SWT is aware of that. So this is this is scholars I met, for example, and I'm not prescribing this. I'm just saying, what happens is that some of our scholars, when they shower, so they're alone. But you're never alone because Allah's always watching. So even when they're showering, then they would have like a loincloth just to, cover the nakedness. You with me? So it gives you an expression of somebody that is so aware of Allah SWT that even when they're alone, right, then there's a sense of bashfulness. So our thoughts, the Prophet ﷺ says, وَالْبَطَنُ وَمَا حَوَى. And then the tummy and what it contains. That's also a form of what you put in is what you put out, what you get out. And كُلُوا مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَعْمَلُوا صَالِحًا. Eat of goodness. And so many times what you eat, it can result in certain type of actions, also the type of bodily reactions. So the Prophet talks about that. وَلْيَذْكُرِ الْمَوْتَ وَالْبَلَى. And he should remember death, and when he's going to come to a point where he's going to be fragmented. وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةَ تَرَكَ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. And whoever wants the year after, he will abandon the embellishments of this world. So Allah grant us a tawfiq, inshallah, that we, the idea of haya is going on for a while, but it's important for us to understand it, and inshallah make it part and parcel of our personalities. That we are, our hallmark is that we are shy, and this was the hallmark of Muslims all over. The Oriental persona had this hallmark of bashfulness. You could see it on him, and it's important and you can witness it as. My one friend should jokingly tell me that if he sees a pretty girl coming along, Then he looks quickly, and then he starts looking at everybody else looking at him. And you mustn't do that. You're with me? But what you should do and what stands out, you see, men like to look and women like to be looked at. So if you conduct yourself with bashfulness, you know, when you walk past a strange lady, right? The beauty of that doesn't go unnoticed. It becomes your hallmark. And your hallmark is that you don't, you know, our hallmark is we're looking for the, what do you call that? The loophole. And the loophole is that the Prophet ﷺ says, you can only look once. So Anis will tell us, so you can only look once, so look properly. No. Don't look for the loophole. That's not our hallmark. That you know, or you look quick when nobody's looking, whatever the case may be. No, your hallmark is that you don't look. And that's what makes a believer stand out. Because it's sacred. And people feel secure. They feel safe like that. A strange woman should feel safe around Muslim men. Why? Because you know that's sacred. It's sacred. It's somebody else's mother, brother, somebody else's mother, daughter, sister, like the Prophet explained to us. So there's and you don't have to tell the person that. They can see from your contact. Because bashfulness is your hallmark. Not like Umar said, you know, walk with you, down at you, bump into whatever you're not supposed to bump into. Not like that. But that must be your hallmark, modesty and bashfulness. May Allah grant us that, inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wa jazakumullahu khairal jazaa.